Hey guys, tonight we slip into the misty air of a Dutch morning, not the kind you power walk through on your way to the office, but the kind where even the fog seems to be yawning. You're there now, standing at the edge of an Amsterdam canal in the early 1600s. The water is still, the sky soft and gray. Wooden shutters are still closed on most buildings, and the only sound is the occasional squawk of a gull and the faraway clang of a church bell calling. Well, maybe calling no one in particular. Because here's the thing. The Dutch Republic may have been an economic powerhouse of the 17th century. Sailing ships, merchant guilds, Rembrandt in his messy studio. But mornings? Mornings were not their strong suit, especially if you're expecting hustle and bustle. This is more of a stretch, sip, and wander kind of civilization. You trudge along cobbled streets that are damp from dew and lined with mossy stone. A milkmaid nods sleepily as she walks past with 2 wooden buckets, spilling a little with each step. The streets are lined with narrow houses, each leaning slightly as if they too haven't quite woken up yet. You pass a bakery, but the shutters are still drawn, and if you're hoping for the smell of fresh bread, it's still a good hour too early. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck your head under a low arch as you pass a sleepy canal bridge. Even the geese seem to be in slow motion. A sleepy merchant fumbles with a heavy iron key, trying to unlock the front of his spice shop. Behind him, a teenage apprentice sits on a crate, staring into the middle distance with the blank expression of someone who regrets both breakfast and employment. The Dutch Golden Age, as historians like to call it, wasn't so golden at dawn. It was a period bursting with art, science, global trade, and absurd wealth. But the working day? It began more like a snooze button you just kept hitting. You duck into a coffee house. Yes, coffee had already made its jittery debut in the Netherlands by the 1600s, though it was more exotic curiosity than daily lifeline. The place is dim and smoky, the chairs creaking under the weight of well-fed merchants in thick wool coats. One of them grumbles about tulip prices. Another flips through a pamphlet announcing some new theological squabble in Leiden. Everyone's talking. No one's working. The morning unfolds like syrup, slowly, and with an odd sweetness. There's a rhythm to it, but not the kind that gets your blood pumping. Instead, it lulls you. Even official city functions, registries, trade boards, guild councils, don't get going until late morning, sometimes closer to noon. If you had an appointment with a lawyer or a notary, you could safely plan to dawdle for hours before needing to show up. Why? Scholars still argue whether this was a function of religious culture, climate, or just collective inertia. Calvinist values pushed against idleness, yes, but Calvinism also prized home life. And the Dutch adored their homes, those narrow little townhouses packed with porcelain, rugs, and family paintings. So why rush out? Also, let's not pretend mornings were convenient. Remember, the streets weren't exactly designed for speed. They were cramped, twisty, and full of obstacles, from loose chickens to stray pigs. And in the colder months, the fog could turn thick enough to make even short trips feel like maritime voyages. And here comes your first fringe tidbit. In some towns, morning church bells were rung late on purpose, not because clergy were lazy, but because they knew no one would show up anyway. Why waste the effort? You keep walking. A teacher crosses your path, carrying a bundle of worn books tied with twine. She stops at the edge of the canal to scold a boy for tossing a walnut shell into the water, then sighs deeply and keeps walking, clearly regretting every career choice she's ever made. You step into a barber-surgeon's shop next. It smells of soap and damp linen. He greets you with a grunt, then promptly sits back down, fiddling with a wooden dice set. Not exactly in a rush to start lancing boils. You sit quietly, listening to the sound of dripping water, the occasional horse clopping past outside, and the low hum of voices somewhere upstairs. In this world, ambition exists, but it's tangled up with the art of patience. You don't leap into action here. You ooze into it. Even big deals and shipping manifests and city contracts were often postponed because someone's cousin's neighbor was still out to morning meal. It's also worth noting that many households had complex, hierarchical rhythms. Servants prepared food, then vanished for errands. Children were instructed, scolded, then left to wander. Fathers read scripture, which might have just meant falling asleep in an armchair. It was a culture where time was both structured and bendable. Which brings us to something odd. Dutch mechanical clocks were among the finest in the world, but actual Dutch people? They treated time like a polite suggestion. Mainstream historians will tell you this was a period of breathtaking efficiency and innovation. And that's true. They just don't mention that most of it happened after lunch. You look up now, and the fog is finally thinning. A man in a crisp doublet opens the shutters of his apothecary shop and sweeps out some dust, just in time for it to settle back again. Somewhere behind him, a child rings a tiny handbell to signal nothing in particular. You realize the city is awake now, in its own time, not because of urgency, but because the sun is a little higher. The smells of stewed cabbage are wafting from kitchen windows, and everyone finally agrees. It's late enough to be morning. You wander further into the cobbled veins of the city, stepping gingerly over a crooked drainage gutter that's seen better centuries. By now, the sun has begun to stretch its way through the thinning fog. Golden beams bounce off the glassy surface of the canals, and you hear the rhythmic creaking of wooden shutters swinging open. Doors groan on iron hinges. Somewhere, a dog barks lazily, more out of social obligation than genuine alarm. It's mid-morning in the Dutch Republic, but don't expect a flurry of productivity just yet. The shops may be open now, technically, but the actual appearance of workers? Still, negotiable. A lot of folks haven't even arrived. And the ones who have? Let's just say they're not exactly tearing through to-do lists. You pass a printmaker's studio, where the apprentice leans out the window chewing a piece of bread, eyes half closed. His master is inside, carefully adjusting a copperplate etching, but he's clearly stalling. Perhaps he's hoping someone will come by and distract him. A customer, a cousin, maybe a goose with strong opinions on typography. Work in the Dutch Golden Age didn't start with a bang. It started with a shuffle, a yawn, a chat about the weather. And usually, it started late. Historians still argue whether this lateness was deliberate or simply organic, whether Dutch workers preferred to wait for warmer weather, or if the famously flexible Protestant church hours allowed people to blend spiritual duty with an extended breakfast. Either way, by the time you hear the distant toll of a tower clock marking the hour, you'll realize it's more ceremonial than functional. A fact worth noting: the term werkdag, workday, in 17th century Dutch documents doesn't always match up with the actual hours people worked. It was more of a conceptual boundary, something you acknowledged, like an old neighbor or a dusty book. Yes, today is a workday, but whether or not you actually work, that's up for negotiation. Even among the bustling merchant class, the engine behind Amsterdam's dominance in trade, you'd find a curious lack of urgency. Ships came in, goods were unloaded, but the deals and documents and negotiations, those took their time, often because someone was still en route, which could mean anything from stuck in a meeting to currently eating herring and cannot be disturbed. Here's your fringe tidbit for the hour. In some dockside offices, clerks would leave their boots outside the door when they took a break, so people thought they were still inside working. Nothing screams productivity like an empty pair of shoes. You step into a cheese merchant's storefront now. The wheels of Gouda and Edam gleam under a dull morning light. But the merchant? He's arguing softly with a neighbor about whether or not the mayor's cousin should be allowed to build a second shed. This conversation has nothing to do with dairy, and yet it takes up most of the morning. A customer walks in, sees the two mid-debate, and decides it's best to come back later. What's curious is how little this gentle chaos bothered anyone. In modern times, we'd call it inefficiency. But in the 17th century Dutch mind, it was rhythm, a social tempo. Work was important, sure, but it had to coexist with conversation, digestion, gossip, mild civic interference, and possibly a spontaneous trip to see a cousin in Harlem. Now, it wasn't everyone lounging around, of course. Domestic servants, for example, were up early and worked hard all day, especially in wealthier homes, where expectations were strict. And ship crews? Absolutely not relaxing. If you were on a vessel bound for Java or the West Indies, your days were brutally structured. But on land, especially among craftsmen and tradesmen, there was a sort of slow-roll elegance to the day. You pass by a silversmith's window, where a sign dangles gently in the breeze. It reads, "Out for morning visit, back when the bell rings twice." No indication of when that is. Just eventually. Maybe before lunch, maybe after. A boy chases a hoop down the street. Two elderly women sit on a bench, one of them shelling peas, the other occasionally pausing to scowl at passing pigeons. You get the feeling they've been at it for hours. This is their work. Watching, waiting, witnessing the city's slow bloom into activity. You stop to look into a narrow alley and spot a small brewery, puffing gently like a sleepy dragon. Inside, two men are arguing over barrels, possibly about fermentation, possibly about politics. It's hard to tell. What's clear is that the keg tapping won't begin until they're done arguing. So, never. You keep moving. A painter adjusts his easel, trying to catch just the right light between two rooftops. But he keeps getting distracted by the swirls of chimney smoke. You hear him mutter something about how light changes faster than a magistrate's opinion, and he throws a tiny cloth over the canvas in defeat. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During this period, the Dutch were leaders in timekeeping technology. Christian Huygens, a Dutch scientist, invented the pendulum clock in 1656, a device that revolutionized the accuracy of timekeeping across Europe. Yet ironically, the country that gave the world precision clocks was one of the most relaxed about what the clock actually meant. You reach the edge of a bustling square. Well, bustling might be generous. It's more like a public yawn. A few market stalls are half assembled. Someone's sweeping. A clerk with a stack of papers stands beneath a lopsided umbrella, pretending not to notice it's starting to drizzle. And then, just as the city seems like it might be ready to work, bam, it's lunchtime. And not just any lunch, not a sandwich in the park. No, you're about to witness something far more elaborate. And far, far longer. But we'll get to that in a moment. The bell tolls again. 12 slow, deliberate chimes. You pause beside a statue of some forgotten admiral who stares blankly across the canal as if bracing for what's coming. Around you, shutters close. Shop signs are flipped. The cheesemonger you just passed? Gone. The printer? Vanished. Even the normally chatty barber surgeon has abandoned his dice game and disappeared into the fog of lunch. It's not subtle. It's not quiet. It's not something you can ignore. The city just stops. Because here in the Dutch Republic of the 17th century, lunch isn't just a meal. It's an institution. A sacred pause in the middle of the day. And not some quick bite over a keyboard either. No, you're about to witness something resembling a mild religious ceremony, except with more butter and significantly more herring. You watch as people pour into their narrow homes, ducking through low doors, wiping their boots, and greeting family members who've already been stoking fires and slicing bread. It's not uncommon to find 3 or even 4 generations gathering around the same table. And they aren't just there to eat. They're there to settle in. Mainstream records confirm it. Most urban workers, craftsmen, merchants, even many clerks, left their jobs completely from noon until at least 2:30 p.m. Some even longer. No guilt, no fear of being fired. That was simply lunch. And what a lunch it was. You step into a modest townhouse just as the food arrives. A thick stew of root vegetables and beef bubbles quietly in a ceramic pot. There's dark rye bread with seeds still clinging to the crust. Pickled onions. Hard cheese. Beer, of course. Sometimes wine. And if it's a lucky day, apple tart. The children dive in with suspiciously clean hands. The elders begin to debate something that sounds like church politics, but quickly dissolves into a story about a goose and a stolen shoe. The room smells of spice and warmth. Sunlight filters through the lace curtains, catching the steam as it rises off the stew. The chairs are mismatched, the table wobbling slightly on an uneven tile. A dog snores underfoot. There's no rush, no schedules, no, just 15 minutes, I have a meeting. This is the meeting. Everyone is expected to be there. And afterward, a little sitting, maybe a nap, or a short walk. You'd better not knock on anyone's door before 3 o'clock unless you enjoy being glared at like a tax collector on Christmas. Historians still argue whether this was a carryover from medieval meal patterns or something uniquely Dutch. Some suggest it was influenced by the emphasis on family cohesion in Calvinist teachings. Others point to the economic structure. The home and workplace were often the same space, making long lunches more natural. Whatever the cause, the effect is clear. This was not a society obsessed with efficiency. Fringe tidbit time. In some neighborhoods, citizens hired musicians to play soft lute music during lunch, believing it aided digestion and discouraged melancholic vapors. Imagine hiring a guy to strum outside your kitchen while you eat pickled eel. You glance out the window now and notice something else. The quiet. It's eerie at first. No hammering, no wagons clattering. Even the canal traffic has slowed. A single barge floats by, its pilot nodding off as he passes beneath a bridge. In the wealthier homes, lunch is even more elaborate. Courses, servants, linen napkins. A brief sermon read aloud by the father while everyone pretends to listen and secretly plans their afternoon gossip. In poorer homes, the meal is simpler. Porridge, cabbage, a small beer. But the ritual is just as important. You find yourself slipping into their pace. The warmth of the hearth, the clink of ceramic mugs. Someone tells a joke about a pastor who misquoted a psalm and accidentally blessed a cow. Laughter erupts. A spoon hits the floor. No one hurries to pick it up. This isn't laziness. It's deliberate slowness, a cultural choice, a collective agreement that life should be paused at midday to be tasted, chewed slowly, digested even slower. You peek into the alley again. Empty. A single pigeon stares at you, as if to say, "What did you expect?" Even the pigeons take lunch seriously here. You pass another home where a family has taken their food into the tiny garden out back. The children pluck herbs straight from the dirt. The mother shoos away a cat. Overhead, laundry flaps like flags of domestic peace. At the local guild hall, even the strictest masters put down their quills and tools. Not only was lunch long, it was respected. Unions didn't have to negotiate for it. It was built into the bones of the day. And if you think this was only a domestic affair, think again. Public buildings shut down too. City Hall, closed. Courts, forget it. Want to file a grievance? Wait until 4. The judges are eating herring. You lean against a stone wall as the smells of fennel and wood smoke drift by. You hear a distant voice reciting a line from the Psalms, badly. Someone hiccups. A baby cries, then settles again. A horse stomps its hooves outside, clearly unimpressed with human timetables. By the time lunch is finished, and it's never exactly clear when that is, you realize you've experienced something rare in modern life. A communal pause, not just for food, but for being, for sharing space and time without the pressure to perform. Of course, not everyone approved. Foreign visitors were often baffled. One French diplomat famously wrote that trying to conduct business in Amsterdam between 11 and 3 was like trying to milk a duck, loud and unrewarding. His words, not mine. But for the Dutch, it made sense. The morning was foggy. The evening would be dark. This middle stretch, sunlit, flavorful, warm, was the heart of the day. Why not stretch it as long as possible? You feel a yawn rising, not out of boredom, but because the world around you has slowed so convincingly that your own pulse seems to follow. The clatter of the modern world fades. All that's left is stew and conversation. And there's more where that came from. The streets remain eerily quiet as you step outside again, blinking against the soft afternoon light. You almost expect tumbleweeds, though in this damp little republic, it would be more accurate to expect a soggy cabbage rolling slowly down a gutter. It's mid-afternoon now, and you're walking through what should be a busy market district. Instead, it feels like someone hit the pause button. Fruit stalls are draped with heavy cloths. Butcher shops sit dark and locked, cleavers put away as though they were never needed. The bakery still smells faintly of cardamom, but the oven's fire is long dead, and a wooden sign on the door reads, "Tarogna de Rust." Back after the rest. You're not in a ghost town. You're just in a country that really believes in its lunch break. In fact, Dutch cities during the Golden Age were known for their peculiar work rhythms, and the afternoon lull was perhaps the most baffling to outsiders. Unlike in, say, France or England, where market activity tended to ramp back up around 1 p.m., Dutch marketplaces might remain frozen in their post-meal silence until nearly 4. You pass a fishmonger's stall now. Still no one there. Just a single seagull perched like an angry shopkeeper. It lets out a long, judgmental squawk and flaps away in disgust. Even the wealthy, who might have had household staff to do their buying, didn't expect commerce to resume too quickly. There was a general understanding, written in no law but obeyed by nearly everyone, that afternoons were transitional. Something between siesta and social recharging. It wasn't just about digestion. It was about space, mental space, civic space. You weren't expected to sprint from lunch into labor. You were expected to be human. Maybe visit a friend, stroll by the canal, write a few lines in your diary while sipping another beer. Mainstream records show that many shops displayed posted hours that officially restarted around 3 or 3:30. But these were aspirational, more like polite suggestions than binding commitments. If the shopkeeper happened to be in the mood to open early, fine. If not, you'd just wait, or come back tomorrow, or spend the afternoon feeding ducks and wondering why your neighbor insists on washing his boots in the public fountain. Historians still debate whether this midday culture was driven more by family-centric values or by energy economics. Without artificial lighting, there was no sense in burning precious candles to work through the twilight. So why not front-load the day with leisure, then cram your actual productivity into a tight, focused block before dinner? You step into a side street where the scent of fried onions wafts out of a tavern door. Inside, a handful of off-duty carpenters are deep into their second round of beer and their third round of backgammon. One of them is clearly asleep. Another is very much not and is arguing passionately about whether cows experience envy. You decide not to get involved. Fringe detail for you. In some neighborhoods, it was customary to hang a particular flower, usually a carnation, outside the door if someone was available for an afternoon chat. A sort of non-verbal, "My digestion is complete, and I crave gossip." You continue walking and spot a pair of midwives sitting on a bench, sewing in silence. They nod as you pass. Not working, not working, just being. In this city, existing productively is a flexible category. Even among professions we'd expect to be rigid, like notaries, teachers, or city scribes, afternoons were fluid. If you had paperwork to file or fees to pay, you might return after 3 and find a helpful clerk. Or you might find his boots outside the office door and a note that reads, "Try again tomorrow. The paperwork resents being rushed." Which brings us to something fun: the illusion of availability. Many tradesmen and minor officials would leave candles burning or shutters open as if to say, "Yes, we're open," while in fact they were sipping wine in the back room or gently snoring under a wool blanket. Dutch efficiency, it seems, came with a side of theatrical misdirection. At the center of all this inaction is a simple, strange truth. Productivity wasn't constant. It was episodic. You did what needed doing when the time felt right, not according to the clock, but according to the body, the stomach, the light, the mood. A mainstream fact worth filing away. Dutch guilds regulated work hours, sometimes down to the minute, but enforcement was rarely strict. A baker's guild might mandate hours of operation from dawn to dusk, but also allow generous lunch windows, afternoon prayer, and something charmingly vague called digestive pause. You stop at a narrow bridge where a flower seller has finally reappeared, pushing her wooden cart with half-hearted effort. She looks up at you, shrugs, and says, "I had a very important nap." You nod. Who among us hasn't? Us. Children trickle back into the streets now, skipping stones and shouting at imaginary enemies. One girl holds a makeshift doll made from an old sock and 2 buttons. She waves it at you with a grin and then goes back to drawing in the dirt with a stick. The town is beginning to stir again, but slowly, like a bear waking from a particularly indulgent nap. There's no alarm, no clanging bell, just the gentle recognition that perhaps now is the time to begin again. Foreign visitors were constantly bewildered by this. Letters from English merchants and French ambassadors are full of passive-aggressive commentary about waiting for the Dutch to finish their lunch, often with the implication that the Dutch are either hopelessly relaxed or sneakily brilliant, possibly both. You walk past a tailor's shop where a half-dressed mannequin leans against the wall like it, too, just finished a second beer. A man inside is threading a needle with exaggerated care. You get the sense that his hand hasn't actually moved in 5 minutes. The rhythm here isn't lazy. It's intentional, like jazz, or sourdough, or bureaucracy. And finally, as the sun tips gently toward the west, you feel it, the energy shift. Doors creak open again. Market stalls blink back to life. There's a subtle breeze, the kind that makes hanging laundry billow like the sails of miniature ships. The Dutch Republic is waking up again. And for the next few hours, it will move, not quickly, not feverishly, but with that strange, quiet focus that only comes after a really, really long lunch. Now that the city has yawned itself back into action, you stroll through the waking streets with a renewed sense of curiosity and mild disbelief. Because honestly, you're still wondering, is anyone really working today? The afternoon sun filters through the narrow alleys like warm syrup. The canals glint in patches where light manages to sneak between buildings. It's nearly 4 p.m., and yet the atmosphere feels suspiciously recreational. You pass a cooper's shop. The sign says, "Open," but inside, the cooper is gently nodding off over a half-assembled barrel, his mallet resting in his lap like a pet cat. In the next shop over, a haberdasher sits cross-legged on a stool, humming a hymn while rearranging buttons into what appears to be a smiley face. This isn't laziness, not in the traditional sense. It's just that the Dutch of the 17th century seemed to have a completely different relationship with the idea of a workday, one that didn't necessarily require 8 consecutive hours of laser-focused labor. Instead, life here revolved around intervals, pockets of effort tucked between extended intermissions of food, family, and staring at walls with vague purpose. You peek inside a candle shop. No candles are being made. The candle maker is instead trimming the wick of an already made candle with intense focus, as if trying to delay the moment he has to do anything else. There's a cup of beer beside him, untouched but not forgotten. You suspect it's been there since before lunch. Mainstream sources will tell you that the Dutch were wildly productive in this era. And they were, in bursts. They led the world in trade, shipbuilding, publishing, cartography, and finance. But look closer, and you'll find that these achievements didn't come from a non-stop grind. They came from an irregular tempo, like a heartbeat that skips now and then, but still keeps the blood moving. In fact, many workers didn't expect to labor full days at all. In textile towns like Leiden and Haarlem, loom operators often worked 4 to 6 hour shifts. Some trades, like printing or bookbinding, required intense concentration and manual dexterity, but they were often broken into half-day segments, with generous breaks for meals, prayers, and what one guild described as eye rest and socializing. Historians still argue whether this peculiar tempo was tied to Protestant ethics, encouraging purposeful living but rejecting overwork as vanity, or whether it evolved from centuries of urban independence and commercial self-governance. After all, when you're your own boss, what's to stop you from taking a very long lunch and then stretching it into an even longer mid-afternoon adjustment period? Fringe tidbit. In Amsterdam, some shops actually offered waiting stools for customers who arrived before the owner was emotionally ready to do business. These stools were often carved with little phrases like, "Wait, and you shall have better cheese," or "Patience brews profit." You head toward one of the town's many inner courtyards, hofjes as they're called. These are small, enclosed garden spaces surrounded by almshouses or residential wings. You spot a few elderly women tending a vegetable patch. They nod at you, then resume a heated debate about whether someone's soup recipe requires too much nutmeg. No one appears to be working, and yet everything functions. Bills are paid, letters are delivered, fish are smoked, books are published. It's just that none of it happens on a timeline that would make sense to, say, a 21st century project manager. You hear a bell ring, not the grand church bell, but a small one attached to the door of a cobbler's shop. It dings as someone enters. You peek inside. The cobbler greets his customer with a smile and then says, "I will work on your shoes tomorrow. They are not yet emotionally ready." The customer nods in perfect understanding. A young boy runs past you, holding a carved wooden horse and yelling something about pirates. You see a cluster of men gathering around a news leaflet nailed to a post. It's covered in smudged ink and wild rumors about Portuguese spices. They argue for a while, then wander off in different directions, having accomplished exactly nothing. There's a strange kind of balance here, a society bursting with trade and expansion that still refuses to act like it's in a rush. It's as though everyone agreed to succeed collectively, but only if they could take their time. You pause to listen to the clink of dishes from a nearby kitchen. Someone is laughing. A woman calls out to her neighbor across the canal, asking if she has more cloves. The neighbor disappears for 5 minutes, returns with a jar, and throws it underhand into a waiting apron. And yet, this isn't a society without structure. Guilds, strictly controlled standards of craftsmanship. Apprentices trained for years before being allowed to take on work. There were clear rules and regulations about materials, pricing, and reputation. But the enforcement? That could wait until tomorrow, or the day after. What mattered more was maintaining trust, not speed. By now, the shadows are stretching across the cobblestones. You feel the wind picking up, tugging at your sleeves like a toddler who's realized bedtime is approaching. But even as the sky darkens, there's still no frantic energy, no scramble to finish tasks. The pace remains steady, slow, almost serene. You walk by a tavern where an accountant is having a very animated argument with what looks like a goat tethered outside. Possibly about taxes, possibly about grain prices. No one intervenes. The goat wins. You've seen nearly every kind of workplace today: shops, stalls, studios, gardens, kitchens, and what ties them all together is nonchalance, not disinterest, not negligence, just a collective understanding that life is better when it isn't sprinting. So if you're wondering when the Dutch Republic actually got things done, the answer is eventually. After lunch, after a nap, after a bit of gossip and a stroll and a small glass of beer. But done, nonetheless. And that, somehow, made it work. You drift along the canal now, the sky tinged with soft amber, the city settling into that liminal space between late afternoon and early evening, what the Dutch might call vooravond, or before evening. It's a time for finishing up, or, more often, not finishing anything at all. You step into a small courtyard framed by willows, and there it is, a modest office, if you can even call it that, right on the canal. A clerk sits inside, legs propped up, idly sketching something that might be a ship or a very tired horse. He's surrounded by ledgers, shipping manifests, and papers that look deeply offended at being ignored. Welcome to the houseboat office dilemma. During the Dutch Golden Age, the line between home, workplace, and floating leisure shack was deeply blurry, especially for those working in trade administration, finance, and canal-related bureaucracy. Some clerks worked from homes that doubled as offices. Others worked from offices that looked suspiciously like houses. And some, perhaps the cleverest of all, worked from canal boats moored conveniently close to taverns. You hop onto the dock, peering through the windows of one such boat. Inside, a desk bolted to the floor, a quill gently drying in its ink pot, and a man clearly asleep with his hat over his face. His boots are off. A loaf of bread is half eaten. A pigeon perches outside like a patient client. This was, in its way, typical. Clerks had long midday breaks, often too long. What began as a lunch would blend seamlessly into a nap. And by the time they stirred, well, was it really worth starting anything new? Better to wait until tomorrow, or the next ship, or for someone else to come along and do the paperwork. You keep walking, passing yet another floating office. This one's door is ajar, a sign hanging that reads, "Gone briefly. Be patient." The ink has faded so badly, it's clear the message has been brief for several years. Mainstream historians agree. The Dutch Republic was one of the most administratively sophisticated societies of its time. Detailed records of trade, city law, land ownership, and naval movements were carefully maintained. But here's the twist. Those records were usually managed by people who worked very slowly and often from very cozy chairs. This is where the Dutch really leaned into a lifestyle of contradictory brilliance. Their systems were robust, their protocols impressive, their clerks often horizontal. And here comes your fringe detail. Some office spaces, especially those near shipyards or market halls, were required by city ordinance to provide hammocks, ostensibly for overnight clerks on long shifts, but realistically, a legal nap license. You pass a shipping agent's window now. Inside, a man and woman are hunched over a map, arguing about shipping routes to Indonesia, or maybe about how many eels are too many eels for a captain's dinner. Hard to say. What's certain is the pace, glacial. They talk, pause, sip beer, pause again. The conversation seems more performance than progress. Historians still argue whether this laissez-faire attitude was unique to certain provinces or a general feature of Dutch work culture. In cities like Amsterdam and Rotterdam, where trade was furious and constant, you'd expect more urgency. But even there, the lunch-to-afternoon drift was legendary. Some international merchants learned to schedule important meetings for 10 a.m. And if they missed that window, they'd simply give up for the day and spend the afternoon admiring cheese wheels. Speaking of which, you step into an actual cheese accounting office. Yes, that was a thing. Cheese was big business. And yet, even here, where wheels of Gouda and Edam were counted like gold, the pace was almost meditative. Two men balance a wheel on a scale, scribble a number, then begin a lengthy chat about rain barrels. This paradox of extremely detailed systems run by extremely chill people is what made the Dutch Golden Age so uniquely effective and bizarre. Things got done. Just not quickly. You lean on a rail now, watching a small cargo boat being unloaded by a team of 3. 2 are working. The third is mostly offering moral support while eating a plum. He pauses to comment on the shape of a passing cloud. The others grunt their approval. A little boy comes by with a note in hand. "For the registry," he tells you. You glance at the paper. It's a shipping receipt. He's been tasked with delivering it to the canal office. You watch as he steps on board the floating office, looks inside, and sighs. The clerk is playing dominoes with himself. And yet, the note will be processed. Eventually, stamped, logged, filed into the proper cabinet, which might be a wooden chest under someone's bed. The Dutch kept records with obsessive precision, but they filed them with the urgency of someone folding laundry during a thunderstorm. A local proverb from the time went something like, "The wind will come when the sails are up. Until then, don't fall in." Meaning, in modern terms, be ready. But don't exhaust yourself pretending the wind is already here. You pass another office. This one is entirely dark, with a sign that reads, "Come back after the bells." It doesn't say which bells. And here's the thing. Nobody panics. No one screams about deadlines. The entire infrastructure of the Dutch Republic seems to float, literally and figuratively, on this slow, measured, maddening rhythm. A half step behind urgency, but somehow still on top of the world. You step into one final office, a shipping insurance clerk. He greets you, yawns, then begins discussing the terms of coverage in such a gentle monotone that your eyelids feel heavier just listening. He talks about cargo loss, pirate clauses, and acts of God while chewing slowly on a licorice root. You're not even the client, and yet, by the end of the conversation, you feel fully insured. Outside again, you hear the creak of moorings, the soft splash of a heron taking off. The clerks, the agents, the registrars, they'll all return to their papers. Eventually. For now, they enjoy the breeze, the canal, and the illusion that there's still plenty of day left to get things done. Spoiler, there isn't. Evening settles in like a velvet curtain drawn slowly across the sky. The colors shift from pale amber to a dreamy dusk blue, and the shadows stretch their long fingers over the canals. You can feel it. The day is winding down, though truth be told, it never fully wound up in the first place. You follow the scent of roasted chestnuts through a narrow alley where the bricks are still warm from the afternoon sun. Lamps are being lit now, their oil flames flickering behind wavy glass panes. One by one, shutters close again, not hastily, but in that same unbothered rhythm that has ruled every moment of the day. At a small fish stall, the vendor packs up what's left of the day's herring, carefully layering them into a wooden box with crushed ice. He yawns loudly, scratches his head under his wool cap, and tells a lingering customer, "Tomorrow. The fish are tired." The customer nods solemnly, as if the herring had personally requested a break. You've now entered what the Dutch might generously call late work hours, the final spurt of activity before the official end of the day. But don't get your hopes up. This isn't a time for mad dashes or dramatic overtime. This is a soft decrescendo, where shops reopen briefly, if at all, and tasks are completed only if they're incredibly simple or involve standing still. You pass a weaver's house. Through the open window, you see her at her loom, hands moving rhythmically. But she's clearly not in a rush. She hums softly to herself. A cat sleeps on a pile of half-finished fabric. Every so often, she pauses, not to rest, but to admire the work. This isn't efficiency. It's craftsmanship. Mainstream sources often praise the Dutch for their economic might during this period. And rightly so. This tiny republic, with its reclaimed land and endlessly stubborn weather, managed to dominate trade routes, build the most advanced fleet in Europe, and create a thriving middle class. But the mistake is assuming that this success came from non-stop toil. Instead, it came from rhythm. And here in the evening, you can feel that rhythm dipping into its final, drowsy stanza. Historians still debate whether this mellow end-of-day culture came from religious practices, family tradition, or sheer pragmatism. After all, most homes didn't have strong indoor lighting. Candles were expensive. Oil was precious. So why stay up late finishing a task you could do better tomorrow with sunlight? Your fringe tidbit for this section? Some wealthier households had designated evening chairs, slightly lower, softer chairs used only after supper. They were considered inappropriate for business matters or serious reading. If someone sat in one of these too early, it was seen as a sign they'd emotionally checked out of the day, which, frankly, feels relatable. You stop by a tavern that's only half full. A group of pipe smokers sits in silence. One plays a slow melody on a lute. Two men in the corner appear to be playing cards, though neither seems to remember the rules. A young woman counts coins slowly, and you realize she's not calculating change. She's just enjoying the sound of the metal on wood. Even here, where you might expect some evening commerce, there's very little pressure to perform. You overhear a tavern keeper say, "If no one else comes in, I'll close when the coals are cold." You don't ask when that will be. You step back outside, and the breeze has shifted. It carries the scent of damp earth and chimney smoke now. Through an open window, a family is gathered around a large wooden table, playing a quiet game with painted tiles. No one is speaking. They're just together. Even official buildings reflect this decline in energy. City halls lock their doors not with urgency, but with a sort of sleepy ceremony. A clerk walks past with a lantern in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. He pauses, checks a window latch, and then continues without speaking. A closing ritual that says, "We tried, we sort of worked, now it's time to stop pretending." You pass a street cleaner sweeping slowly. He's not trying to finish the job, he's simply doing the job. A few children trail behind him, drawing patterns in the clean dust with their feet. It's worth noting that many Dutch people of this time weren't obsessed with productivity metrics. There were no time clocks, no hours logged in spreadsheets, no performance reviews. Instead, they seemed to hold a belief that if you lived decently, ate well, took care of your home, and showed up when needed, that was enough. And you feel that here, as the last real light slips beneath the rooftops. Another mainstream fact for the record. City ordinances in places like Delft and Utrecht did include curfews, not as punitive measures, but to encourage domestic rest. Most citizens were expected to be indoors by 9 or 10 p.m., unless they had a good reason. This wasn't enforced harshly, but it shaped the cultural rhythm. Evenings were for home, for quiet, for letting go. You pass a canal boat with a flickering lantern and hear a woman's voice reciting a poem, possibly from memory, possibly made up on the spot. Her words ripple across the water, then vanish into the blue-gray dark. Even the animals seem to respect the rhythm. The cats find windowsills. The dogs curl into hay beds. The pigeons roost like lazy gargoyles on crooked chimneys. You've walked nearly the whole city today, and by now it feels like the entire place is inhaling one last long breath before slipping into stillness. The church bells ring once, just once, somewhere far off, not to summon anyone, but perhaps to say good night. And as you head back through the alleyways, your own feet soften. Your own shoulders drop. You are part of this rhythm now. You've stepped into a world where no one rushes the end of the day. They let it fade, gently, quietly, with room to breathe. There is, as they say, always tomorrow. You've wandered long enough to know the streets by scent, clay, beer, roasting nuts, and a lingering wisp of chimney smoke curling through the twilight. The world around you has fallen into true evening now, and everything seems to exhale in unison. The Dutch Republic doesn't go out with a bang. It ends the day like it lived it, gently, with one last cup of beer and a few complaints about the weather. As you step into a quiet residential street, you notice a peculiar calm that blankets the entire neighborhood. Windows glow faintly, curtains ripple in the soft breeze. You pass a row of houses where a few men are gathered outside, not working, not even talking really, just standing. One smokes a pipe. Another scratches his beard while staring at absolutely nothing. It's not awkward. It's ritual. This, you realize, is the evening pause after the evening. A sort of post-evening limbo where nothing needs to happen. No entertainment is required. No productivity is expected. If someone invents the world's first board game in the next room, no one will play it until tomorrow. Inside homes, you hear the sounds of quiet maintenance. Chairs being stacked, a fire being stoked for warmth, not cooking. Children are already in their nightshirts, arguing about something small, perhaps who moved the slippers. Mothers issue soft commands. Fathers grunt, lift, or fetch things at half speed. Everyone seems to move in slow motion, as if time itself has grown heavier. Mainstream historians describe this as the domestic turn, a cultural shift from civic space to household space that marked the official, if unspoken, end of the public day. You're now firmly in private hours, where the city becomes a patchwork of glowing interiors, each one sealed behind hand-carved doors. You walk past a tailor's home. Through the window, you see him repairing a waistcoat by candlelight. Not urgently, not for a customer, just because he finally has time. A glass of schnapps sits beside the thread spool. A dog sighs beneath the bench. Outside, a single sock flutters on the line like a tiny flag of surrender. Fringe detail. In some Dutch households, evening storytelling was an expected task, not a casual pastime. Families would rotate the role of verteller, the storyteller, and take turns recounting local legends, family lore, or dramatic reimaginings of minor events. The time grandfather sneezed during a sermon was apparently a household favorite. These stories weren't just for entertainment. They were how wisdom, memory, and sarcasm passed from one generation to the next. You pass one such home now, and through the window, you hear a boy describing an encounter with a runaway chicken in great emotional detail. The adults listen with mock seriousness. A woman claps slowly. Someone adds a new plot twist involving a ladder and a boot. Even the buildings seem to lean into each other now, as if tired from standing tall all day. The canal water reflects them in soft distortions. A lantern bobbing in the distance blurs its light across the ripples, like the last thought you forget you had. Historians still debate whether this strong evening inward turn, the preference for staying home, keeping quiet, telling stories, was a form of religious self-discipline, a result of urban living, or simply a cultural coping mechanism for an overstimulating world of trade, noise, and flooding. Regardless of cause, the effect is clear. Nightlife in the Dutch Republic was not a party. There were taverns, yes. There were gatherings. But the average person? They stayed in, They read. They told stories. They stared into the hearth like it was a window into another universe. And books. Oh, the books. You duck into a small bookseller's home. He's not selling anything now. He's reading aloud to his wife, whose head is already tilted back in that pre-sleep state of gentle disagreement. The book is a travel narrative, possibly fictional, possibly deeply embellished. It includes pirates, Dutch explorers, and what may or may not be a ghost who gives tax advice. This was normal. Even the less literate families often owned at least one reading book, and a designated reader, usually the eldest child, would perform a chapter each night. It didn't matter if it was well read. It mattered that the words filled the room. You head out again, the air slightly cooler now. The smell of extinguished candles lingers, part beeswax, part soot. A cat brushes against your leg, then disappears under a cart without explanation. You pause at a bridge and look down at the black water of the canal. A single barge floats slowly past, unlit, pulled by the soft clop of a horse from a distant street. There is no urgency in the way it moves. If that barge arrives tomorrow or the day after, it will still have done its job. A clock tower strikes 8. Then another, with a slightly different chime, strikes 8 again. You wonder which one is correct. You suspect neither. You also suspect no one cares. Because in this world, clocks are more like background singers than timekeepers. They fill the air, but they don't set the pace. That job belongs to the people, and the people are, at this hour, finished for the day. You pass an old woman with a candle in her hand. She doesn't look at you. She's murmuring something to herself, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a shopping list. Her steps are soft, deliberate. She vanishes into the darkness between houses, and you suddenly feel as though you've walked through a living museum that has politely decided to go to bed. Even the bells ring differently now, fewer, softer, as though whispering instead of commanding. And that's the great irony. This republic, which once dominated the seas, mapped half the world, and reshaped international finance, did so not by sprinting toward greatness, but by pacing itself into it, slowly, quietly, with one hand on a ledger and the other wrapped around a mug of beer. As the last light fades from the canal and the windows grow dark, you feel it settle into your bones, the rhythm, the slowness, the steady comfort of a society that knows how to stop. The night deepens, and now the Dutch Republic seems to disappear into itself. Streets that just hours ago hummed with herring debates and cheese gossip are silent. Lamps glow dimly behind curtains, casting warm squares onto the cobblestones, like tiny paintings hung by sleepy hands. You're walking now in a world that doesn't fear quiet. In fact, it seems to celebrate it. You step softly past the front of a barber's house. Earlier today, he was shaving a merchant while telling an outrageous story involving a goose, 2 monks, and something about a broken pew. Now, the same man is inside, barefoot, in his stocking cap, spooning what looks like warm porridge into a bowl. His wife knits in silence. His child is fast asleep beside the fire, mouth open, legs everywhere. The day has folded itself up like a letter and been gently placed in the drawer. This isn't just rest. This is an intentional withdrawal from the world. And while many societies treat nighttime as merely the absence of action, The Dutch seemed to treat it as its own form of presence, something to do, or more accurately, something to not do. A space carved out for reflection, decompression, and the sacred art of looking at absolutely nothing for an extended period of time. You cross a bridge and glance down at the canal, still, dark, and absolutely uninterested in your presence. The water doesn't ripple. The wind has gone quiet. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once. It's the loudest sound you've heard in 20 minutes. Mainstream records note that cities like Haarlem and Utrecht had formalized night watch systems, complete with lanterns, halberds, and the occasional drunk volunteer. But don't expect excitement. These guards were less likely to break up bar fights than to quietly nudge sleeping bakers awake to remind them they left their oven door open. You turn a corner and spot one of these watchmen now. He's not marching, he's strolling. He holds his lantern low, letting the light fall just far enough ahead to see his own boots. He hums, not a melody really, just a low tune that helps keep the silence from feeling too large. He nods at you, doesn't ask questions, doesn't scold you for being out. There's no curfew panic here. Just an understanding that night belongs to those who respect its stillness. Fringe tidbit. It was common practice to listen to the house. That's not a metaphor. People genuinely believed that houses made different sounds depending on the weather, the spirits within, or how well the family was doing. A creaking beam? Normal. A shutter clicking just once? Ominous. A dog sighing too loudly? Time to sprinkle salt at the threshold, just in case. You pass a house with no candlelight. The windows are shut. The garden gate is tied with twine. Whoever lives there has decided the world can go on without them until sunrise. And really, that's the theme of the entire evening. Let the world go on. Without you. For now. You pause near a public fountain where the water has stopped. Not frozen, just turned off. Someone shut the valve before bed. A practical act that feels poetic in the moment. Even the water knows when it's time to rest. Historians still argue whether this deeply private, nocturnal quietude was a form of religious introspection. Calvinism encouraged evening prayer and humility, or simply a cultural habit born from weather, lighting, and architecture. When you live in close quarters, noise at night becomes a crime worse than theft. A slammed door could be social ruin. And so, the Dutch perfected the art of soundless winding down. In some homes, beds were built into the walls, tiny curtained sleeping boxes that looked more like cupboards than furniture. Couples would climb in sideways and sleep curled up like cats in a drawer. It sounds uncomfortable. It was. But it was also quiet, contained, tidy. Just like everything else here. You pass a row of such houses. Through one window, you glimpse a grandfather lighting a taper and whispering a prayer. Through another, a woman arranges dried flowers in a vase she'll forget she placed. Through a third, nothing at all. Just the slow sway of a curtain and the impression that someone was there, but now isn't. The final shops are shuttered now. Even the taverns have emptied, save for one man sweeping sawdust from the floor with exaggerated slowness. He hums a tune that might be a hymn, or might just be boredom in musical form. A church bell tolls once. 9 o'clock. It echoes more than you expect, bouncing off brick and water and sky. A few moments later, another church follows, slightly out of sync. You can almost hear the shrug in their timing. And yet, beneath all this softness, the Dutch Republic continues to function. Ships still float in harbors. Grain still waits in warehouses. Ledgers still sit on desks. Ink still drying from notes jotted before supper. But tonight, none of that matters. Not until the sun returns. You cross a final bridge and stop. The moon is out now, thin, high, and slightly smug. It knows what the city knows, that peace isn't something you earn. It's something you make room for. One breath at a time, one candle at a time, one quiet hour after another. You've almost forgotten what urgency feels like. At this hour, the Dutch Republic is no longer a hub of commerce or cartography or naval power. It's just a cluster of gently snoring houses, glowing embers, and bed sheets that smell faintly of starch and wood smoke. The entire nation, it seems, has given itself permission to rest. Not collapse, not shut down, but truly, intentionally rest. You stroll now along the outer ring of the city, where the wind carries fewer smells and more silence. Even the geese on the canal have settled, beaks tucked into feathers, floating like sleepy punctuation marks on still water. And yet, you sense movement. Not the busy kind, not the kind with carts and footsteps and shouted orders, but something quieter, slower, the soft gears of a night that still has work to do, but at a volume designed for dreams. You peek down a narrow alley where a man lights a lantern with the precision of someone who's done this every night for 40 years. He moves like a ghost that pays taxes. In this part of the city, you find the workers you didn't see earlier, the ones whose schedules are deliberately inverted. Bakers, millers, certain brewers, and canal watchers. These folks aren't part of the extended lunch break elite. They belong to a secret order of sleepy-eyed tradespeople who wake when everyone else dreams. Mainstream historians point to this as one of the Republic's odd balancing acts. While most of the country relaxed into semi-slothful rhythms, a select few labored silently through the night, ensuring that bread, grain, and security would be ready before dawn. These were not the celebrated heroes. These were the candle-burning ants of the Dutch hive. You pass a bakery now, and sure enough, the windows glow. Inside, 2 bakers work side by side in the flour-dusted warmth, folding dough and laughing in whispers. They work barefoot, sleeves rolled, faces shiny with effort, but not haste. They know time is on their side. No one expects croissants at midnight. Fringe tidbit? Some of these bakers, especially in coastal towns, would bake bread based on tide charts rather than clocks. If the water was high, certain loaves rose better. If the wind was strong, ovens cooled too fast. It was baking as a science, a superstition, and a local weather report, all in one. Further along, you pass a windmill. At first glance, it's asleep. No motion, no creak. But step closer, and you hear it. A faint grinding, a sigh of gears, the dull heartbeat of a mechanism older than memory. The miller is inside, probably alone, probably humming, probably chewing on something that used to be an apple. These are not glamorous jobs. These are essential nocturnal rituals. You don't see accolades or crowds, just warm hands, oil-stained shirts, and the steady confidence of people who understand the worth of their work, even if it goes unnoticed. Historians still argue whether this night labor was respected or simply tolerated. Some guilds paid bonuses for night shifts. Others pretended they didn't exist, preferring the illusion that everything happened politely between breakfast and dusk. But the truth is, without these sleepy lifelines, the country would have woken to stale bread and unground flour. You pass another mill, this one idle for the night, but perched on its fence is a weather vane shaped like a fish. It creaks gently as the wind changes, pointing east, then south, then deciding not to commit. Beside it, a lantern swings from a hook. You wonder if someone lit it for safety, or to feel less alone. Because that's another truth of this hour. Night is honest. In daylight, everyone has purpose, posture, performance. But at night, you see the real faces of a society, the workers who don't clock out, the households that burn one last candle for comfort, the boatman who drifts not because he must, but because the river asked politely. You stop by the harbor, where a few fishing boats bob in their cradles. Ropes creak, nets sway. The air smells like salt, rope, and old fish. A sailor leans on a post, eyes half closed, pipe forgotten in his mouth. He's not guarding anything, just keeping company with the tide. Here's your quirky moment of the evening. A man walks by leading a goose on a string. No explanation, no hurry. The goose is wearing what looks like a knitted sock. You do not ask questions. You merely nod. And the man nods back, because this is the hour for accepting strange things without comment. You turn away from the docks and follow the scent of early bread again. A nearby tavern kitchen is open just wide enough to reveal a figure stirring something in a pot. Not for the guests. It's closed. This is for staff or family, or anyone who wandered in too late to be turned away. Because in the quiet corners of the Dutch Republic, night doesn't mean no. It just means less, slower, softer. You cross a final bridge, and there it is again, that sense of suspended motion, a city between chapters, not asleep, not awake, just held. You wonder how many cities in the world ever functioned like this, with so little urgency, with so much grace for pauses, with such deep trust in the quiet, invisible labor that happens when no one's watching. You wonder if maybe you should operate like that sometimes. But don't worry, you can think about that tomorrow. You're deep in it now, the part of night when even your thoughts start to whisper. The Dutch Republic is nearly silent, yet it feels more alive than ever. Not because there's movement, but because everything that needed doing has already been gently tucked into place. You follow a narrow lane that winds between houses where all the shutters are closed and only a single candle flickers behind warped glass. The lane feels like a secret, and you begin to suspect that this hour was never meant for plans or goals. It's for drifting, for observing, for noticing. Up ahead, you see an open doorway with a faint golden glow inside. You move closer, quietly, respectfully, and peek in. It's a spinning room. Not grand, just a warm nook filled with wool, baskets, and two older women seated at spinning wheels. They turn the pedals slowly, their hands steady, their words soft enough to pass as wind. They don't look up. They don't need to. You're not intruding. You're simply joining the rhythm. This is where night reaches its deepest honesty. No commerce, no performance, no spectacle. Just humans, lanterns, threads, and thoughts. A time when even spinning yarn becomes an act of quiet worship. Mainstream historians often glide past this hour, citing it only as pre-dawn stillness. But that's like describing a painting by naming its frame. What they miss is the texture, the soft continuation of a culture that never needed to shout to matter. You step away from the spinning house and walk along a mossy path that leads to a communal well. There's a bucket set beside it, full but untouched, left for the first early riser. It's a small act of trust. No note, no name, just a gesture. You get the sense that half of this country runs on unspoken agreements. And then there's the fringe fact for this section. In certain Dutch towns, it was common to leave chalk drawings on doors, not as graffiti, but as signals. A heart meant visitors welcome. A wheat stalk meant extra bread to share. A circle with a dot. That meant a new baby inside. Walk softly. These weren't enforced or official. Just quiet codes in a world that valued subtlety over signage. You smile as you walk past a door with an old chalk mark, a faded triangle. Possibly once a dinner invitation. Possibly just a child's joke. Either way, no one's cleaned it off. And that says something. You cross another bridge, your steps the only sound besides the faint lapping of water below. The canal reflects the moon so clearly now it looks like a second sky, stretching beneath the city. And still, you see traces of motion. A candle flickers behind a warehouse window. A man steps out briefly to smoke, then disappears again. A dog pads silently across a courtyard, pausing just long enough to yawn. Historians still debate whether the Dutch truly meant to be this quiet, or whether it was just the result of strict city design. Dense blocks, narrow alleys, shared walls. Maybe they didn't choose quiet. They just adapted to it. But somewhere along the way, they made peace with it. Then they made it sacred. You pass a tiny chapel, its stone porch glistening with dew. No bells, no chanting, just stillness. Inside, a single lamp burns behind a pane of stained glass. You don't go in. You just stand for a moment, letting the hush soak into your spine. The churchyard is filled with low stones, some tilted, some half sunk. No names visible, just lichen and shadow. It doesn't feel sad, though. Just sleepy in the deepest, oldest way. You sit for a while on the chapel step. You breathe. You listen. To what? To nothing. And everything. Because somehow, this forgotten hour, this murky pocket between late night and dawn, is the one that contains all the threads. The still lofted bread, the just ground grain, the half-read book, the unfinished stories, the neighbors who didn't say goodbye but always say good morning. It's all here, wrapped up in a blanket of almost light. You rise eventually and keep walking, past darkened schools, past shoemakers' stalls, past a window where a pair of boots rest beside a bucket of lavender. Their owner is likely asleep, dreams probably involving canals or cheese or a suspiciously judgmental goose. You spot a man repairing a broken wheelbarrow by candlelight. Not because he needs it today, but because might as well. That's what this hour invites. Not obligation, but soft opportunity. The moon dips lower now. Birds begin to shift on their perches. A rooster somewhere tests his voice and then, wisely, decides to try again later. The air smells different. Cooler, lighter, touched by dawn. But it hasn't arrived yet. And you? You're still part of it. Still drifting through a republic that taught the world how to map coastlines, tally profits, and colonize continents. But also how to take a really long nap after lunch and not feel guilty. You're almost at the edge of the city again. One last canal, one last bridge, one last blink of lamplight before it, too, fades. And as it fades, so do you, into the rhythm, into the dark, into a society that thrived not by rushing, but by knowing exactly when to stop. The hour before dawn is a liminal space. The world is not asleep, not awake, not even dreaming anymore. It's just waiting. And here, in the Dutch Republic, that waiting takes on a kind of grace. No one tries to rush the morning. They let it arrive on its own, like a long-expected guest who always shows up right on time, even if you stopped watching the clock. You find yourself now at the outermost canal, the final watery ring before fields begin. The city's soft geometry ends here. Rows of houses give way to barns, to windmills with blades like sleeping giants, and to mist that drapes the earth like a second sky. You walk along a path of cobblestones so slick with dew they glisten like pearls. A cart stands nearby, already half loaded with milk jugs. The horse is still asleep. The driver? You can't tell. He may be inside, sipping the last hot drink before beginning the day. Or maybe he's just as willing as the rest of this nation to let things begin slowly. Mainstream sources often portray this era as a triumph of morning routine. Ships launched at dawn. Bread hit the stalls early. Market bells rang before church bells. But here's the quiet truth. Morning didn't begin when the sun rose. It began when the people were good and ready. And even now, most of them aren't. You pass a farmhouse with a kitchen window lit by firelight. Inside, a woman stirs something thick in a pot, her motions methodical and soundless. She isn't rushing. She's easing into it, just like everything else in this country. Your fringe tidbit? There was a widespread belief, especially in rural areas, that starting the day in silence protected the house from misfortune. Talking too early could wake the wrong spirits, as one Zealand proverb warned. So families would go about their first tasks with only gestures, nods, and the occasional cleared throat until the second candle was lit. You see that practice now. A man exits his barn, nods to his daughter carrying eggs, and they both move like dancers in a choreography of hush. The chickens don't even bother clucking. They know what kind of family this is. Back in the city's edge, a few shutters crack open. A boy peeks out, sees the gray sky, and closes the window again. A reasonable reaction. A woman sweeps her doorstep with delicate strokes, as if afraid to offend the dust. Two cats stare at her like they disapprove of the noise, and in the canal, a single barge glides through the water, pushed by a boatman who doesn't row so much as nudge. The boat doesn't ripple. It just suggests movement. You stop on a footbridge to watch it pass. You can't hear anything but the water's whisper, the breeze in a nearby tree, and the soft scratch of a baker lighting a fire 3 streets away. Historians still argue whether the Dutch fondness for this soft start was philosophical or just practical. Was it tied to Protestant values of discipline and humility? Or was it just what happens when your streets are so narrow that any morning chaos echoes like cannon fire? Maybe both. Probably both. Either way, the result is a society that wakes with the patience of a cat in sunlight. You feel your own breathing slow. Your feet match the rhythm of the place now. No longer the curious visitor, you're a drifting figure in a sleepy painting, one brushstroke among many, moving gently toward the day. Another bakery door creaks open. Steam rises. The smell of crust, butter, and warmth unfurls into the air. You consider following it, but decide to wait. There's no rush. The bread will still be warm in 20 minutes, and if not, there will be more tomorrow. A bell rings faintly, far off. Not urgent, just a signal. The world is starting to remember it exists. The sky above you has gone from deep blue to ash gray to the softest blush of pale gold. Not a sunrise exactly, more like a gentle suggestion of one. The kind that doesn't blind you or demand attention. It just happens, like so much else in this place. You pass a group of market workers hauling crates. They move slowly, whispering jokes and yawns. One of them stops to pet a dog. Another steals a fig from a cart. No one shouts. No one calls the boss. No one seems particularly concerned that nothing is moving quickly. Because here's the thing. This country conquered the seas, shaped global finance, mastered trade and art and science. And it did so with a work ethic that valued flow over frenzy. And as the first real light begins to settle on rooftops, you finally understand why their lunch breaks lasted hours, why their clerks napped in offices, why bread was more important than speed, why spinning yarn by candlelight was not wasted time but sacred, because a republic built on water, clouds, and long silences couldn't have done it any other way. You take one last look at the city, the soft outlines of gabled roofs, the slow unfurling of steam, the occasional sleepy voice calling good morning in a tone that almost feels like an apology. And you realize that here, slowness isn't laziness, it's an art form. And now, the city exhales once more. This time, not into sleep, but into wakefulness. And you? You've been here all along, riding the rhythm, breathing the hush, letting the soft pulse of a distant century lull you gently toward the edge of dreaming. And now, we settle. The sky has finally given in to the morning. Pale gold spills across the rooftops. The canals reflect soft ripples of blue and pink, and chimney smoke begins to curl again. This time not from late-night embers, but from the kindling of a new day. But for you, the journey is coming to a close. Let your breathing slow, deeper now, longer. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders sink just a little further into the pillow or mattress or whatever warm nest you've built tonight. You've walked the whole Dutch Republic in soft silence. You've drifted through kitchens and chapels, boats and back streets. You've listened to the slow rhythm of a people who understood that life isn't a sprint, but a pattern. You've seen how stillness can be sacred, how time doesn't always need to be managed. Sometimes it just needs to be noticed. Out there, in the waking world, bells are ringing, shops are opening, and the wheels of modern life are spinning up fast. But in here, in your mind, your body, this quiet space you've carved for rest, you don't have to join them. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Instead, picture the morning mist still hovering over the water. Imagine the slow clip-clop of hooves in the distance. A window opening, a loaf of bread being wrapped in cloth, the gentle creak of a windmill waking up. But don't follow it. Let it drift away. You're safe.